sort of switching gears to the digital world. And it was a very refreshing talk from Janice, but we also now have Francisco Grajales giving us a talk about going digital. And so with the current innovations and trends, you do understand the importance of digitization, machine learning, robotics, and etc. And there was a review that came out from MIT, and they said strategy, but not technology, is what drives digital transformations. So it would be excellent to get a strategist's perspective on how technological transformations are affecting the digital world right now. So we have Francisco Grajales, who did his bachelor's in information systems from the Trinity Western University in BC. Then he went on to doing his master's in knowledge synthesis in UBC, followed by PhD in big data. He has also worked for Scotiabank, and recently, for the last 14 years, was a part of the Canadian Forces. Currently, he is working for Deloitte Digital on a contracting basis as a manager, and now they're joining forces, so the whole company is joining Deloitte, and Francisco would be able to give you more insight on that. So without further ado, let's welcome Francisco.
Can everyone hear me okay? Do I need to bring it up? We're good? Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're having a great conference. My name is Cisco, and unlike traditional presentations where I can show you trends, I want to talk to you about a personal strategy and a personal story, because that will help you as you move from your graduate degree towards a career in management consulting, really figure out what it is that you want to do. So before we begin, I'd like to throw a few questions out to the floor and ask you what excites you the most, or what are you most interested about when it comes to digital? Anyone? Yes?
The possibility for experimenting, testing, find the best things that work.
Testing? Okay, very cool, and experimenting to figure out what works best, yes?
The implications for future jobs.
The implications for future jobs. That's huge. That's huge because a lot of the jobs that people will be working on 5 and 10 years from now don't exist now.
Enabling companies to scale.
Enabling companies to scale, yes, absolutely. Any others? Yes?
A lot of products are hyper-personalized, and that's because of the data that's available.
Absolutely, absolutely. So without further ado, I'll tell you a little bit about myself. You're wondering, who am I? My name is Francisco Grajales, and I was born, I'm known as Cisco, and if you have Facebook or social media, I'm Cisco G-III. And I have a number of biases. I was born in Mexico, in Chiapas, and if you're wondering where that is, it's way down here, right beside Guatemala, in a place called Tuxtla Gutierrez, a place where medical education and innovation looks like this. Now, can anyone tell me what this would be used for in a surgery? The level of resources in that particular medical school and in that hospital does not allow them to have video conferencing. And so in order to teach new students, one of the doctors figured out that if they attached a mirror and they had a nurse holding it, they'd be able to watch the procedure and learn while still allowing for patient safety. Some of my hobbies, I'm a bit of a nerd, and I think that's how I ended up in digital. And when I go back to my high school experience, I had the first Palm Pilot, if any of you know what that was, where you used to writing graffiti in order to be able to put the information in. At 16, I also joined the military because I wanted to buy a Mustang, and the numbers worked better. And then I continued it as a hobby, A, because I love this country, but 2, because it kept me clinically relevant in all of the other work that I did. And so my job here today is to really inspire you. So before today, you may have been Jane Doe, and after today, I hope you will have become Jane Doe 2.0. So when I began to use the web, just to give you a bit of a framework, we had dial-up. How many of you got to use dial-up? And DOS. So maybe you remember what this meant. Maybe not. Right? That was when you were looking for files. Or Alta Vista, anyone? They were the good days. And libraries felt something like this. So, in terms of a vision for the future, I have a video, but because of the way the slides are, I think we're going to skip it. Is it possible to put it up? Do you have it?
Is it the PDF?
It's not in the PDF. You just need a browser. Okay, just Google Microsoft Future of Health. Will the audio sync? Future of Health video. There you go, that video. Yep. Check.
Plug in the. No, it's on that computer.
Oh, do you? You have to plug it in?
Yeah.
I'll
You can just put the mic. Oh, it's up there.
Okay. And what I want you to think about when you see this video is in your lifetime, you will experience some of the biggest changes in history when it comes to technology. And what you see in this video, most of that technology exists today, and we'll be able to interact with it as organizations build their digital DNA and their strategy to move forward. So, we can make see. No audio? We can skip. Oh, there you go. So put it back from the beginning. No worries. Thank you. Exciting stuff? Any thoughts or questions about the technology that you just saw? Now I want you to imagine explaining that and how you understand it to your grandmother. Would she be frustrated? Would she be excited? How would you go about explaining it? Anyone? Take a stab.
I'm trying to demonstrate it visually, so possibly show up the video.
Yes, visually is good, right? And when you're working with large organizations, think of you and your grandmother having run her house a particular way for 50, 60, 70 years, and you coming in and saying, hey, Grandma, why don't you try this iPad so we can talk to each other on a regular basis? And why don't you use this smart pill dispenser so I can keep an eye on you so that when I only have 15 minutes to chat to you because I have a career in management consulting, I don't have to focus on whether you took your medication, but we can just have a human-to-human conversation. And in the end, that is the role of technology. Technology is not the end goal. It facilitates human-to-human interaction. So exponential trends, we've all heard them. Bigger, better, faster, smarter. Typically we say good, fast, and cheap. You only get to pick two. And in everything that you do, you'll very much go along those lines. That has really driven by two factors, or two theories. One is Metcalfe's law, which really talks about the more nodes that you bring into a network, the more complex it becomes. And the next one is Moore's law. And the way that I like to sort of describe this, how many of you remember a Game Boy? The first Game Boy? Okay, that computer was 100 times more powerful than the computers that took man to the moon. And so if every 18 months, because we see this slowly getting, that time span getting shorter, computing power doubles. The problems we have today, that we're able to solve today, versus the problems we have tomorrow, we have that much more computing power. And if you haven't read much about quantum computing, I encourage you to just try and understand the basics behind it. So my story, which is really where I wanted to take you to, as far as going digital, because when you come out of the session, I want you to think about those curiosities that you have and then turn them into something tangible as you have a career in consulting. So for me, when I think of, when I was a kid, I had the first Pentium back in Mexico, in my city. And when we had dial-up, I actually asked my dad to get another modem so we could go faster. That later became the Palm Pilot that I told you guys about. And then as I went through my teens, every little cent that I made from my work in the military, I spent it on new toys. From there, I started my undergrad, like many of you, and I continued being a geek. And so in terms of my research, I started looking at chronic disease risk assessment algorithms and how they could be implemented on the web. And the petrifying thing, that was almost a decade ago, my conclusions and my results haven't really changed. Today, if you go online and you want to figure out what your likelihood of having heart disease is, you can go to the American Heart Association, Canadian Heart Association, put in your lipid profile, and it'll spit out a number. And that number doesn't really tell us a heck of a lot, other than telling us that you have this much likelihood of having heart disease. But let us assume you're on the other side of the page, either with the team that's helping the hospital, or you're the clinician, and you're trying to tell that patient, you need to change your lifestyle. You need to smoke less, you need to drink less, you need to exercise more. And let us just assume that that patient follows everything to the T. 4 months later, they do the exact same assessment, and it spits out a relative risk that is lower by 8%. How many of you believe that that patient is going to continue down that same path when the reduction in relative risk has been minimal? Anyone?
8% for 4 months is not bad, right?
That's a huge improvement, but to a patient who has gone from 68% to 60%, do you think you'd want to keep doing that? And that's exactly what my undergrad found out. And 10 years later, when you have an iPhone, you look at all of the apps and what they're trying to do to help people live smarter, what are people doing? How long do people use apps for, guys? 1 day, maybe, right? And then you've got some people that have introduced stuff like gamification. And if you haven't used the app called Lark, it's really funny. I recommend it. That one took the grand winning average of 3 days, at least for me. And so whatever you keep being passionate about, I cannot tell you how to write that story. I can tell you that from there, I sent 200 emails and ended up in Geneva at the World Health Organization to do an internship. And I figured, hey, what better place to learn about health than the organization that's supposed to coordinate it big picture-wise all over the world. What I learned there is that it's becoming less and less relevant, and organizations like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation have a lot more impact. So I figured, okay, that doesn't work. My dreams have been shattered. I'm going to go to someone who can make something else happen. And so because I realized there was so much money driving development, I said, okay, well, let's go to the World Bank. Again, I sent about another 200 emails, made about 80 calls until some sucker picked up the phone on the other side. And I got a job. So by this time I was doing my master's. I found a way to convince my supervisor to let me go do a field placement. And my job was to audit about $168 billion worth of technology investments. I had zero financial training. I was just a regular PhD in the health sciences. And interview people and ask them what went well, what went wrong. And what I found, again, it wasn't technology, it was people. And so that actually led to me to, can I go back? Yes, I can. That led from the World Bank for me to work for the local office of the World Health Organization, created my first company doing custom software development. I sold it a couple of years later, doubled my money, and moved to Toronto to retire, aka start my PhD. It wasn't a lot of money. It wasn't like a big exit. It was just fun, and frankly, I burnt out. And the one thing I can say to you is learn to develop your own self-awareness and how to protect yourself. Because when you work on projects that are so exciting to you, that keep you going, you run on adrenaline, and if you're not careful, you end up somewhere else. Anyway, so I show up to Toronto, I start my PhD. Through this time, I've always worked and gone to school full time. 6 months in, I realized I was really bored. The pace at which the academies moved was making me hit my head against the wall. And worst of all, I was used to living as someone who had a regular income, not as someone who was a student. So needless to say, I started looking for work, and I thought that because I'd worked for 2 large institutions, had run my own company, I'd be able to find a job. And so I applied, the 200 type stuff, and I got 2 responses, overqualified or no response. So by chance and serendipity, I ended up at Scotiabank with the team that launched a mobile payment system in Haiti. And so I don't know how much you know about Haiti. They had a big earthquake. Logistics were a big chaos. Money couldn't be distributed, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation basically said, we're going to give this $1 million prize to the first organization who is able to develop a mobile payment system. And so the team that I worked with won that award. And again, I had no idea what it was being thrown into. I think my favorite story from that time was I would walk into a meeting, I would have a notebook, and every lingo word that I heard, that I had no idea what it meant, I would write in the back of my notebook. And then once everyone had left from the office, I would go online and start searching so I could know what people were talking about. Needless to say, I got through my comps while I worked, decided that the bank was no longer for me. I got promoted twice. And one of my largest clients from my previous company showed up in Toronto, which is the Radboud University Medical Center. And by the time he got back on the plane, I had a contract. That grew organically, looking and scouting out technology companies here in Canada that could help make the cost of healthcare cheaper. If you guys have heard of CloudDX, for example, they recently won one of the X Prize Epic Innovators. They're a Canadian company. I brought them over to the Netherlands, and that caught the attention of Deloitte, which is how I ended up there. So the secret sauce. No one when I was 11 could have told me that wanting that Pentium, the first in the city, and having 2 dial-up modems would lead to solving a problem which is analogous to explaining to your grandmother what that future of health video is. But what I can say is, if you take back some time to reflect and think about how your own interests can be applied in a different way, you're going to be much better prepared for a career in consulting. One of the best examples I can give that you can probably take home from here is whatever data you're doing for your research, try and open it in programs like Tableau, like SAS, like Excel, and try to create and think about how you can visually represent it differently. A, you might find something cool that you can put in the papers you're going to be publishing, but B, when you're on the other side already working, and someone says, can someone visualize this on Tableau for the client? You can just jump in. I'd like to thank Descartes for the presentation style, and I'd like to answer any questions that you may see. How am I doing on time? You're good. Any general thoughts or questions? I'm that bad of a speaker. Awesome. Yes, please.
Thanks, Cisco, for your presentation. So I have a question about personalized medicine.
Yes?
Specifically pharmacogenetics.
Yes?
How do you see it fitting in with the Deloitte healthcare system, especially in terms of payment? Who pays for the service?
Who pays for the service? Very good question. The answer you're going to learn to always say in consulting is, it depends. I can tell you this. When it comes to rare diseases, the system will pay for it. But those are the diseases that have a prevalence of, 1 in 10,000, 1 in 100,000, that sort of level. When it comes to preventing, there's something called health technology assessment. I don't know if you're familiar with that process. The biggest or the easiest way to simplify it is, if you assume the life of a person costs $80,000, and the technology, after it's implemented, costs $75,000, then paying $75,000 by the system, what we call a quality adjusted life year, would lead to a result or a cost savings of $5,000 to the system. If the cost of that technology is $85,000, then the system would not deem it to be cost effective and therefore wouldn't pay for it. So it depends on the application. I think a lot of the promises that had been expected have not yet fully been realized, but you're going to see companies like Dynacare playing a bigger role, and more, the $1,000 genome and now microbiomes are going to play a significant role in what people adopt these products. Yes. Sorry.
Sorry, was that question answered? Yeah. Okay, excellent. So I wanted to learn a little bit more about the company that you own right now, and it's working with Deloitte.
Yep.
And how is your take on your company, and how is it digital? And
Yes.
how is this implemented in the digital sector of Deloitte?
Okay, so let me take a step back. Deloitte Digital is a cross-sectoral practice, a cross-vertical practice. That basically means that we take people from consulting, from HR, from IT, from whichever, and bring them together to work on things that are digitally related. So if I play your question back, is how did one lead to the other, or is it how are they related?
First, a little bit about the company that you had previously
Yeah.
and how it tied in with Deloitte.
Okay, so long story short, research buddy of mine who I loved having beers with, kept telling me, let's create a company, and I'm like, we don't have a client. Why spend the money if we don't have a client? When I left the World Bank, I got increasingly bigger consulting contracts. And what I mean by that is, at that time, when you're a student, just starting your master's, 5-10 grand to write a paper or a strategy, whatever else, seems like a big deal. And so I got more and more and more of those until eventually they said to me, we want to create a database of health-related data and visualize it for people, i.e. our customers, which in those cases were ministries of health, so they can see how their strategies related to school health are having an impact or not, and how they were being benchmarked against other countries and other sections. So I called up my friend who was doing his PhD in computing science, and I said, hey, can we do this? And he said, mostly yes. We might need to figure out how to outsource part of it, but let's do it. So that first project, when you have a nice flashy client and you take a very deep dive in making sure it works, led to recurring contracts. Because they said, oh, they did a really good job. So they start having lunch and learns and talking to their colleagues about what they're doing, and then 2 months before the end of fiscal, they realize they've got 30K or 40K to blow. Otherwise, if they don't, they're going to lose it for next year, and someone gives you a call and says, hey, we got this much money to blow, what can we do with it? And so you become a bit of a translator, but in reality, it's all about relationships. It's all about your friends. Because of that, so the companies that we started working with got bigger and bigger. Pharma came into the play. Pharma is great to work for because they have money and they pay. They take a while though. And then, eventually we grew organically. And for me, that time when I burnt out was because I did 23 trips in 1 year, most of them international, without necessarily coming home. So, get on a plane, go plan A, give a presentation, figure out what you're going to do, go to the next place, go across the pond, do the same, keep going, until eventually my mother called. And she asked me, where are you? And I looked at my business partner, and I was in the center of a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And I said, where am I? And he answered, you're in the Palace of Seville. Beautiful place, by the way, if you ever get a chance to go. And so I went and answered my mother. And when I got home, I started realizing, what's the point? If you don't even get to have cuddle time with your partner, you don't get to enjoy your friends, you're just going from one to the other, to the other, to the other, to the other. I needed to take a step back and just breathe and figure out where I wanted to go. And I think I heard a little bit about the last presentation and how she left consulting. Consulting is a lot of fun. It's high energy. There's a lot of type A people. But you will also find that if you don't take a step back to protect yourself, the people that burn out is the people that haven't figured out when to take a step back and recharge. And your relationships with your colleagues, your relationships with your leadership needs to be strong enough that if you're getting to a point that you need to step out, I'm very, very grateful that I've been super impressed with the leadership at Deloitte. I phoned up one of the partners and one of the senior managers that I worked with, and I said, I need to take a week off because it's just been going crazy. And I haven't unpacked 3 different suitcases from my trips because I just came home, left it, packed a new one, off I went. And he said, don't worry about it. Didn't have to take vacation. I didn't have to do any of that. That understanding is there, but you need to follow yourself. And to me, how did my new company come about? Well, when I was working for Radboud University Medical Center, I was basically representing them for partnerships here in Toronto and in Canada and a little bit of the US. And people got to know me as a person. And you go for a drink or you go for coffee and they say, we've got this really challenging problem and we have no idea how to tackle it. So my business grew organically that way. Why did I choose to, bring my whole team over to Deloitte? I think for me is the challenges are bigger, the people are awesome, and rather than focusing on contracts that are, 80, 100K here or 150K, I can focus on big transformation type projects that I would never be able to do on my own or with my small team. So that's sort of what led to that. But what I think already I know I'm going to miss is the intimacy of friendship with the people that you work with. The people that I work with now, both sitting over there, truly have made me feel humbled as a leader, because no matter the challenge, they always step up to the plate and we have a lot of fun. And when you work with your friends, it's just, you never work a day in your life, really. Yes?
Well, just from hearing about your experience, you work with so many different projects, so many different organizations. What do you think is the next step for you?
To me, personally, is staying at Deloitte and figuring out if I want to be on the partner track or not, or the subject matter expert track. I'm at a point in my life where I want to have kids. I'm not getting any younger. My parents are getting older. So I take less risk than I used to before. And so loving what you do and ensuring you can take care of the other personal stuff is fundamentally important. Yes?
Yeah, I was wondering if you could comment on digital and, I guess, security issue. Like in that video you showed, there's a doctor giving patient information. So what's the role of new technologies like blockchain? Is that something that we should be aware of? The technology of the future, like a layer of trust?
Yeah, I mean, technology comes and goes, right? And I'm going to give you an example, right? I was a nerd. I figured out who was doing, have you ever heard of Second Life? Any of you? Some of you? Okay, so it's like World of Warcraft, but its own thing, created by Second Life. They have their own currency. And me being a geek and wanting to go to a conference paid by my supervisor, I phoned up another friend that I had met at a conference and I said, let's do a presentation on how you can use the Ann Myers Medical Center, which was a virtual hospital that was built inside of Second Life, for medical education. And so we wrote an abstract, sent it off, did the presentation, and it went well. 8 years later, I'm at the Medicine 2.0 conference in San Francisco, and they've got this virtual reality headset, and they've done this training materials for surgeons, and I put on the headset, I've got the integrating things, and I've worked in the operating room through the military, so I'm doing this, haptic feedback, virtual reality thing. Super cool, super exciting, but it's not that much different than what we did in Second Life 8 years ago. And so when you talk about the role of new technologies, you should keep a pulse, particularly if you're interested in digital, on what's new and upcoming. For example, the Google phishing attack that recently happened. You should try and understand why that happens and how it could apply to the work that you do, right? I love Coursera. If you're ever debating whether to watch something, there's some great videos. I love TED. That's what I typically do to keep myself sort of inspired and thinking about what could be done differently. But security is a solution that can be solved, right? The security paradox is usability. If you have something so secure that no one can use it, then there's no point. The inverse also applies, right? And when you download Facebook on your phone, how many of you have Facebook on your phone? Okay, awesome. And it asks for access to your microphone 100% of the time, and your camera. Do you guys know why? Nope? Okay. So primarily focused for the US. We haven't implemented a lot of that technology here. But what they've done is the microphone is trying to pick up beacons of sound as you move around in your day-to-day life. Those beacons of sound are inaudible to the human ear, but audible by that microphone. So that if you walk into a store which has these beacons, and Facebook picks up on it, as you walk through that store, it'll activate, it'll know where you're walking, what products are there, and the next time you come on your timeline, the advertising that will come will be targeted to you. That is one of many examples of how technology drives and changes. And if you're interested in the privacy and security sort of piece, Citizen 4 is a really cool documentary to watch, as well as Terms and Conditions May Apply. And you can find us on Netflix. Yes?
I have another question.
Please.
So, coming from a science background,
Mm-hmm.
and if you wanted to go towards this digital sector in
Yes.
management consulting, how would you position yourself?
How would you position yourself? Very good question. I think the biggest challenge with a lot of people that come out of the academies towards consulting is they have very good critical thinking skills, but they don't have very good business thinking skills. And what I mean by that is you should know things like Excel cold, because, let us assume very few people will follow my path in the sense that when you go to a big firm, you go in at the manager level. In your cases, depending on your work experience, typically the way that would go is you would go in as a consultant or a senior consultant. At that level of role, I think you need to focus on technical skills like Salesforce, technical skills like SaaS, which what most students don't realize is these organizations will, a lot of the time, give you free licenses, and there is free training for you as a student, but the level at which you're able to operate when you come in and the level of appetite a firm will have towards you is going to be much higher if you have that, right? If you're interested in a very specific finance place, I would say do your CFA. Things like PMP. Consulting is this wide, and the bigger the breadth you have around technology, you will be able to operate better, and you will be more interesting to the firms, right? Because the process, the Deloitte way or the BCG way or the McKinsey way is something that they're looking for someone who can still be molded and learn the way that they operate, but can answer problems. And what was fascinating to me is, you email someone in the university names shall not be named, and maybe they send you a response 3 days if they're good, 5 days, 7 days. If I send a text message to a partner at 11 o'clock at night, which I did, I had a response in 3 minutes. And so, doesn't mean you're going to be doing it all the time. We had a proposal we had to submit, but being able to sort of get out of the framework of academia and more into the business sense, what matters to an organization, understanding the basics of marketing, the basics of a P&L, how to build a financial model, it's not something you're going to traditionally find, and I don't even think a lot of MBAs teach it well. They teach you a lot of the theory, but the practicals, I think that's what you want to try and find. Does that help?
We have time for 2 more questions.
Good. Yes. There's 2 over there. I'll start with the ladies first. Yes.
Sorry. So when building a bridge between what you did in your academic research
Yep.
and between what you're doing in your practical life,
Yep.
do you have any advice for like us who are like trying to build that bridge?
I think one of the simplest ways to do it is try to find a way in which your research applies to industry in one shape or in many shapes or forms, and talk to the people in industry that are in that side. Because you're tangibly able to add value because you understand the research and the nitty-gritty, and then they're able to train you to what matters to them, right? Like, when I started my research, I wanted to do a clinical trial for my dissertation, and I was young and naive, and, let us just say it didn't go as according to plan. Now I'm in a place where I'm working, and I have clinical trials going. But hearing it from the people that are in this space, I think, is probably the best. I would also welcome you to think very deeply about the firm that you want to go to and what it is that attracts you to that firm, and finding people that have a similar background in some way, shape, or form to you, and asking them what they did, what was their biggest gaps, so that you can bridge those before you come in. These 2 guys over here, we're all going over to Deloitte, and the partner, one of the things he keeps telling me is, we need them now. And I'm like, they're not ready yet. They're not ready yet. It's not that they're not ready to go, but it is right now I'm giving them the runway to pick up the skills that is going to help them thrive above their regular colleagues at their level. And so in that process, getting in sooner is not necessarily as beneficial as having those skills and thriving once you're there. Things like PMP would be able to help you depending on what firm you choose to go into. I mentioned Tableau, SAS, SQL, all of those. Having a rudimentary understanding, Agile, will allow you to be miles ahead when you come in. The second question?
I'll just make it quick. So when do you think pharmacogenetics-based education optimization could be mainstream?
That's a loaded question, right? If I had a crystal ball, the answer, quite frankly, is I think we need to get all of the pharmacare together for all the provinces. And I think that will be a big drive for a lot of other things. The example that I always like to use and think about is actually that of Brazil and antiretrovirals. I don't know if you guys are familiar, but basically the prevalence and incidence of HIV in Brazil was rising at such a pace that the Minister of Health called pharma and said, either you lower the price of your drugs, or we will declare this an international sorry, a national emergency, in which case we don't have to follow international patent law. That particular example, you know, they did lower their prices. And I think in Canada, we have a long way to go because we really have more than 12 different healthcare systems before we'll be able to get there. So yeah, I hope that answers your question. I think that's, yes? The police are gone.
I mean, in terms of healthcare, and maybe, like, yeah, having the ultimate goal to achieve what that video showed,
Yeah.
just, I mean, do you think the right path is through the government, especially for Canada, or is it through small companies to really drive that change? Because, I mean, there's that e-health thing. I think we have the technology to do some of it, at least.
Yep.
It's just, we're just not there.
What is the path? I think, you know, it's really, really interesting you asked that question. I think a big picture of that path is the P3 model, public-private partnership. I had some clients from Norway who came in a few weeks ago. And what was interesting was having worked in Europe in so many large hospitals and knowing how beautiful their hospitals are there and how forward-thinking. You know, Radboud was the first hospital to have Wi-Fi for patients and staff end-to-end. That was 8 years ago. We had the first shipment of iPads. I went and I called up, I showed them the 2 hospitals that I was proud of being in Ontario. One was Women's College, because it's very newly built. And the other one is down in, it's just built, down on Lakeshore. What is it called? Remind me. Anyways, and the name will come back. And what was interesting is, in that particular hospital, I'll look it up in my phone in a second, Halton Healthcare. They went out of their way in using public-private partnership models to bring in technology that has never been seen in Canadian hospitals. And when you're looking at digital transformation, and when you opened and you talked about strategy being the way to go digital, what the leadership of this organization realized is that they needed the architecture backbone, not only in terms of the physical building, but in terms of the rack space, the servers that had to be done that would allow them to leapfrog what many other hospitals are doing. And what's interesting when you actually look at the data, what they thought would be their utilization in 4 years, they ended up achieving in less than a year. And the reason behind that is because people perceive that a new hospital is going to have higher quality of care. And so they will drive from across town to go to that emergency department or to find a doctor that will send them there because they perceive that the new sexy looking hospital is going to give them better outcomes. Is that the case? Not always. I love the facilities. And so when you talk about, is it a startup the best way to go through? It's going to be a combination of all of the above. We have some amazing medical startups in Toronto. One of them is Figure One. And, you know, their goal is to be in every doctor's and healthcare professional's pocket around the world. And that's a pretty cool story to tell from a Canadian perspective. Secondly, and finally, I guess, because I don't know how we're doing for time, keep your eyes on what's going on at Mars. In many ways, my career began at Mars. And I came to Toronto to be at Mars. The level of people, presentations, and what happens in that hospital district, I think is unprecedented worldwide. Okie dokie. Thank you very much.